Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Don Dev podcast. Today, I have with me Wes Ehrlichman, the chair of the St. Louis Game Developers Co-op, which Somber Studios is a part of. If you are interested in game development and are in or around the St. Louis area, I highly recommend checking that out. Great supportive group, very knowledgeable, hosts events all the time, just top notch. And today we are going to talk about microtransactions. It's kind of been a hot topic for a while now, and it doesn't seem to be going away. So, um, I'm just gonna hop right into it. First of all, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Since you just introduced me as the chair of the co-op, I also want to make sure that since it's such a sensitive topic, that my views do not necessarily represent the views of the co-op. It's more just like me as somebody that's into games and has opinions on stuff. So
Right. And that's another thing I really like about the co-op is like you can go into the Slack channel and there's a lot of different opinions on things, it's not just kind of a hive mind. You can kind of like bounce different ideas around each other. So, good disclaimer to have
yeah.
though. So, I feel like a lot of the uproar seems to be around microtransactions in full price AAA games. Do you think that the AAA industry is going too far with them?
um, I I do think they are, and I also think they aren't.
Mhm.
Um, I think it depends on the game, but I also don't. I guess I guess the question is, what does going too far mean? Like, what's the outcome? What's the outcome going to be for going too far? That's
Uh,
really all that matters.
I would say the primary factor would probably, to me, be like customer outrage, people getting fed up with it, I guess. Because, I mean, obviously, in any space, making games or any product in general, you want to, be able to make money and have as many revenue streams as possible, to stay afloat. But it's, there's this big, notion in the gamer community that these companies are simply just being really greedy, that they're making enough money and they just want to milk everything out of you, which I feel like a lot of the game companies, the typical response, which I feel has some merit, is that it's about player choice. So, what do you think about that? The player choice versus, milking the consumer, because that seems to be kind of two sides of the same coin.
I think that they're not at odds with each other.
Hmm.
I think in some ways they are milking the consumer, and if the consumer pays for it, that's how the consumer communicates to the developer that they don't mind being milked.
Hmm.
Um, I just think when you go too far, you're going to drive people away, and that's been the case with with games like Battlefront failing to meet projections and just them having to roll back all the microtransactions and paid microtransactions and um, yeah. So the system is sort of working in a way.
Hmm. And
Uh,
I feel that's a good point because, like, there's a lot of gamers, especially with the Battlefront thing, where people just, you know, took to the internet and went crazy about it. But at the same time, obviously, there's a lot of people who are totally fine with it because it's still making money, a lot of money. Like, I can't remember, there've been sales projections, like, and like, I know, like, insider information saying that microtransactions for some AAA games make more than the actual game sales, you know, which, so, I mean, obviously a lot of people aren't too fed up with it, even though that's, kind of all we hear is just, enough is enough. But I mean, is it really hurting them that much, do you think, at this point? Like,
um, well, let's look. So the original Battlefront sold over 10 million copies,
mm-hmm,
and I expected to sell 13 million.
mm-hmm,
It might have sold 13 million, but the second one has sold 9 million. So if you think about that, most franchises on the second ones tend to increase in the number of sales. And then if you take 10 million copies away and then you also knock off all the expected like microtransaction dollars, like yes, there are people that are playing the game and enjoying it, but ultimately their decision to be less, what's the right way to say this? Their decision to kind of milk, well, as you said, like milk the players has had a detrimental effect on the entire goal of them building the game,
mm-hmm.
like which is making money getting back the money from the Star Wars license and paying the dev team, paying for all the marketing. Like, not that it's not going to make money. I mean, I'm sure it's going to make a ton of money, but a lot of when you get to the stock market, a lot of how much money you make is mostly in how well you can anticipate how much you'll make. So you can make decisions with an estimated outcome. And when your estimated outcome gets like trampled on,
Yeah.
even if you don't meet even if you still are profitable, it's still painful generally.
Right. Do you think that do you think that the customer outrage influences, investor happiness? I mean, everybody, everybody online likes to say that, like, well, as long as the investors are getting paid, they're happy. But I mean, like, at some point, PR becomes part of the equation, right? To kind of like, influence their future decisions, or do you think, it is just purely, they got paid, they're happy?
I mean, I think EA is a company whose primary goal is to make money,
Hmm.
and I'm more sympathetic to them than most people.
Yeah, I kind of noticed that when we were talking about it when it was all kind of going down, which
Yeah,
is kind
but
of why I
even if
wanted to
you,
talk to you about this specific topic,
yeah,
was just because I know we wouldn't, just we wouldn't be in 100% in agreement on everything. So,
yeah, but I mean, I'm sympathetic to them because I think that they're trying to make decisions based on how people act, not necessarily on what they say, because sometimes those things are different. Like, um, like pretty much, like I haven't heard too many people say positive things about Candy Crush,
hmm.
for example, but it's one of the most popular games in
Right,
existence.
yeah.
And like that's because the way people act and the way people talk are sometimes different. And I think Battlefront, my expectation was something along those lines too. Like uh, people will buy it, and if they feel exploited, then it's not like they're going to continue to put their time into it. It's not like they're going to suddenly throw a bunch of money at it.
Hmm.
Like the effect is that the enjoyment of players is going to go down if they don't feel like putting time or money into something is having the results that they expect.
Hmm.
Um, and I think ultimately, like it looked like Battlefront 2, even if it didn't have all the outrage, would have just made people resent buying it, which ultimately is going to end up in EA like being able to sell fewer games in the future. And how does that like in all? I mean, it all ultimately is going to come back and affect their stocks, but
Hmm.
uh, because ultimately the way to have a sustaining company is to have happy customers that want to give you money.
Hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Um, so like it really feels to me like all of this is pretty confined to the AAA space at the moment. Do you think like if AAA companies continue to, at least public perception wise or like, vocal gamer wise continue to like milk the customer in their eyes, do you think some of that outrage is going to pour over to indies, or do you think indies are relatively safe to keep, kind of doing their thing, innovating, doing their, experimenting with microtransactions, or is some of that hate going to kind of flow over into the indie industry too?
I don't think it's fair to say that it's confined to the AAA space. I
Hmm.
think that the AAA space is now uh, adapting some of the models that have worked well in mobile.
Right.
And mobile was built from indies or smaller companies kind of adapting business models uh, from Korea or from like other countries uh, where it's more games as a service.
Hmm.
And as games turn into games as a service with like all games being not all games, but I think that if you look at what's the upcoming EA game?
Oh man, I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah. Uh, like anyways, that is basically a direct trying to compete directly with Destiny.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be the lifestyle game, like the game that people who buy a system for one game and just play that game,
Mm-hmm.
uh, like they want to make that game. Um, and uh, yeah, and that kind of model. I mean, I guess it's been around for a while on
Mm-hmm.
PC.
Right, like
Uh,
with World of Warcraft and
yep.
stuff like that.
But
Um,
that, like, World of Warcraft has a business model that nobody else could compete with because anybody who's willing to use to buy into that business model basically already playing World of Warcraft.
yeah,
So
yeah, and I generally like I see pros and cons to kind of the games as a service, transition that's happening now. Like you said, it has existed in a lot of spaces for a long time, but it's becoming a lot more like kind of a standard. And I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I see pros and cons, but does the games as a service model make the industry overall more competitive? Because at that point, like you're competing, like if someone's paying like a monthly fee to play your game, like in the case of like World of Warcrafts or whatever, does that are you, because I feel like games, especially in the indie space, have been very collaborative, like very much sharing information, like what have you done? But does the games as a service model, if it becomes, the new standard, make that really tough to do because companies are now competing more and more for people's time, because somebody's not going to pay a monthly fee if they're not spending a lot of time on that game. I feel like, do you think the games industry, I guess both AAA is already pretty competitive because like you said, they're making games to beat each other all the time. But like in the indie space specifically, do you think it's going to become more competitive and less collaborative because of the games as a service movement?
I don't think so. I think that the number of lifestyle games that people have like tend to have to be small.
Mm-hmm.
Like people playing Destiny aren't looking for something to replace Destiny. They're not looking at all because they're not like they already have their game. Um, and I think like just like with World of Warcraft, as more and more people try to make games that do that, that's going to take up certain types of people that are looking for certain things in games, and the rest of the people are going to go to indies. Like I don't feel like it's the same market.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so we have a local company called Butterscotch Shenanigans, and they were very concerned about the indie apocalypse, which was something that uh, people were talking about a couple of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
where just like there's a huge flood of indie games and there's not enough like money to support that. They also talk about things like when is the best time to release a game, and in some of their research, what they figured out was like releasing your indie game at the same day as a AAA game, like there's no evidence that that your game sales will be impacted by that
Mm-hmm.
because it's kind of different markets, it's different sets of money. Um, and the people that are going to be into indie games, if they are into AAA games, are probably uh, they're they probably I assume have a budget kind of for both. I know I personally like I have a certain budget every month, and I keep 20 or 30 bucks set aside for like weird random indie stuff to come out,
Mm-hmm.
uh, just so I can keep up to date on that stuff. So
Gotcha. That's a good point. That's a good point. Like I feel like right now you're kind of right in that they are, not entirely separate markets, but fairly separated. Different, very different. I feel
yeah,
like
esports are another one that's like I don't know what the overlap is.
yeah, yeah. I f-
Because people who play like fighting games like Street Fighter or like League of Legends or like if they play that and that's like their game, then uh, I don't know that I think they probably dabble in other things, but I don't know that
mhm,
they're taking away from any other markets.
right. Um, I think another source of anger, specifically with microtransactions, is ones that give a competitive advantage in multiplayer games. That seems to be a big point of contention. Do you think that there's any legitimate use in that context for microtransactions, or does that automatically make a game pay to win?
I don't think pay to win is inherently bad, but I think if you have a game that's pay to win, um, you you can't have an esport, or like your game can't be legitimately competitive. And it's not just pay to win; it's also pay to unlock, or not pay, but play to unlock powers. Like if you're playing a game and by putting in 30 or 40 hours, you can unlock a certain weapon that is unequivocally better than other weapons, then your game is going to be broken, and that's going to make people not want to play it. And it's going to like impact the ability to gain new players, which means it's just going to have a real short tail. I think that like having a game with strength that you unlock over time is inherently like kind of anti-competitive, and it ruins that competitive nature of the game. A really good example of that is like Halo 5. Halo 5, they have like cards and like an unlock system, but it's limited to just the like big team modes where your actions play such a small role in like whether your team wins, that just like having crazy stuff happen because somebody has spent money is really not a big deal. It kind of makes the game more fun. But all of the like esports and competitive stuff is completely separate from what your unlocks are. And that allows the game to be competitive, but also be like have a fun multiplayer mode to it that like it doesn't really matter if it's pay to win. I also think the idea of pay to win, like what people want to get out of games is a feeling of accomplishment, especially with like multiplayer games. And if something is pay to win and it's like, and they don't have systems in place to combat that or like work against it. For example, like if you pay for a weapon or if you have a more powerful weapon than other people, you're going to probably win more often, which means matchmaking is going to put you up against harder people or other people at least that have the same weapon, and it all kind of balances itself out through systems. And if they do that, like then it's fair, and they have to do that. Because if you don't do something that's going to keep things fun for players, you're just going to bleed them, and then the game's just going to be like dead, especially for online things.
For sure. So it's something you kind of mentioned, and something I kind of thought of during the whole Battlefield thing. Like a lot of people were really mad about, Darth Vader takes like, I think the original like estimate was like 40 hours to unlock or something. And I heard that and I kind of thought to myself, I'm like, man, I remember when like that would be a positive thing, right? Like, oh, I can play this game for this long, get good at it, like go hard and get this super special thing. But for certain games, or do you think that was just the anger of that was just a result of the rest of the loot box controversy, and that like, because unlockables obviously are not new to video games at all. Even really really hard to attain unlockables, like achievements, for instance. Like people go after those like crazy, and like it's a driving factor. Like why? I guess just for the sake of this, let's stick to this context. Why in Battlefront 2 was Darth Vader, like why did people groan over that instead of accepting it as like a challenge? Was it just the grindy nature of the game, or do you think something else was at play?
I think that so from a game design perspective, I think the idea of making stuff take forever to unlock is so if you read what EA actually said at the time, they said that based on people's play patterns during the beta, they priced things appropriately based on what they perceived their like players to like what they perceived their players like playtime and like play patterns would be. And I think that's like I can only assume that they have a ton of metrics backing that up that says Like there's going to be people playing this game like nonstop, like day through night, like based on the demo at least or the beta. And those people are good. Like we want to keep those people engaged in the game for a long time. How can we do this? And I think that that decision to price them high came in from that. I also think that the decision to price them high came from if you take content, you price it really high, find out that people aren't getting it or like you're losing players, and you double the amount of like experience you give or like do a lot of like promotional things to make it easier to get things, then people feel really good about that.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of feeling like, oh crap, like people are running out of content, let's raise the prices of everything. Like, what if they had gone in that direction?
Mm-hmm.
Like, which one is going to cause more anger in the community? Like dropping the price of a character by a ton and making it easier to get, or raising the price of a character by a lot because people are running out of content. Like, they both seem bad, but like if they raise the price of something, that would be an immediate like uh,
Yeah.
firestorm.
Oh yeah, I agree. I didn't think about it that way because like oh man, I can only imagine if I was like grinding towards a certain character and then all of a sudden it's twice as much. Like screw you, the people who bought it for cheaper still have it, but you have to work twice as hard as them. And you're right, that would be. Man, I feel like EA specifically kind of put themselves in a lose-lose situation there. Like,
Yep.
what do you do except shut off the microtransactions because people are so pissed about them? Like,
Yeah, but
it's
even if like nobody was pissed about the microtransactions, I think what they would have done is looked at how people are playing the game,
mm-hmm,
looked at like uh, if they're gaining players or like um, if the people are playing the game the way that they want them to,
mm-hmm,
and they would have adjusted all the numbers on the like over time in order to make the economy feel fair to get the outcomes that they want. Because
mm-hmm.
that's kind of what they're trying to do is like have a specific outcome. And that outcome is going to be like, let's make a certain amount of money, but it's also going to be, let's make sure that we have a certain number of players and let's make sure that the players we have are happy and tell their friends about it.
Right.
Um, and if they can't do all those things and balance them in the right way, then the game is just going to like immediately fall off. Um, Earlier you brought up like pay to win.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I think Battlefront is an easy one to make pay to win because if you look at all the old games in the series, all of them have always been horribly balanced.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost as a badge of honor in a way. I mean, that sounds really bad, but like making you feel awesome when you like slash someone down with an overpowered Darth Vader is a really good feeling. And like beating Darth Vader with Chewbacca, even though Chewbacca like is maybe lame, or like uh, with Wicket, like
Mm-hmm.
if you choose Wicket or somebody that's like underpowered, and you can do something cool with him, that also has a certain feeling that you know what to anticipate and you know what you're going to get out of it, kind of. Uh, and the game is kind of balanced around being unbalanced. So if you take
Right.
that and you throw it, like you let people pay for that stuff, like it's not any different than having just a super unbalanced game,
Yeah.
except for the fact that you feel like you might feel underpowered, like you have no chance.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's how you feel, then you're just going to quit playing. So
Yeah. It's a good point. How do you feel? Because like people have generally, I feel like, been okay with microtransactions that are just cosmetic. But lately I feel like even those are getting a lot of flack, from like, different things like skin economies and, people will say, well, if it's even if it's cosmetic only, loot boxes are still gambling, something like that. Do you think that the hate, more recent hate for just cosmetic stuff is like unfounded, and if it's just cosmetic it should be fine, or is there a point to be made there that that's kind of, not okay either in some contexts? Like,
I don't know that anybody cares about cosmetic stuff. I think people just don't want loot boxes. I think people just don't want to pay for something and get nothing out of it.
mm-hmm,
Uh, and loot boxes have that possibility. And then when people do that, then they're gonna feel exploited or like they wasted money because they did waste money, but
Right.
there wasn't any other option.
Right.
I think one of the nice things about loot boxes that one of the nice things I like about loot boxes is it conceptually is that there tends to be a way in the game to earn money to buy a loot box. And when you buy a loot box, you'll get something out of it, and you have a sense of like from those loot boxes that you get from like the in-game currency you win of what the value is going to be out of what you buy. Like you have a sense of like the odds of getting a certain type of card or a certain type of like cosmetic upgrade. And because you have a sense of that, you know what you're buying and you know what the odds are, and you know like you're not gambling from nothing. You're gambling from a sense of what the economy is built up by multiple times buying like buying with in-game currency like loot boxes or whatever. And it's kind of like it's an extension of what a lot of mobile games have always done.
Right.
Like a lot of good DLC does is they give you like in order for people to buy DLC or loot cards or like loot boxes or anything like that, people immediately are turned away from those kinds of things mentally because like the odds are already stacked against you. So because people's minds are already like kind of by default against it, the games have to figure out ways to telegraph in your brain what you're going to get out of those things.
Right.
So the designers have to do a really good job of communicating what that loot box is and why you want it. And then when you buy it, they have to live up to those expectations, which is different than when you buy a $60 game. When you buy a $60 game, the only like what they're doing is they're communicating to you like through video or like through just like brand or through like commercials. It's through things that you have no idea really whether this thing actually is going to be what it looks like they're selling you. So in that way, I think loot boxes and DLC are a more respectful way of selling someone content.
All right, I can see that. That's a really good point. What are some games that you think like when you think of games that nailed it when it comes to microtransactions? People are happy, everything's good, like people feel like they're getting good value out of it, but the company's still making money. What games come to mind?
I think Rock Band is probably the thing I spent the most money on.
I
DLC
love
wise.
Rock Band.
I have like over 400 songs, and I like when that game was real popular and they would like release full albums, I would just like spend over like more money than I would buy on the CD just to like get the album for Rock Band. And it's like I knew what I was getting, and it felt like a great buy, even though I haven't played a ton of those songs even more than once.
Yeah.
But that game does DLC really well. Also, just because there's so much content.
Yeah. And I feel like Rock Band does a great job of setting expectations. Just like, this is exactly what you're getting. You know what the schedule is. I think they still come out with DLC every Tuesday. Some weeks are skipped because, they super active on Reddit. I know that they, talk to their user base all the time. And I feel like nobody has ever complained about the microtransaction system themselves. There's always just been people complaining about the actual songs. Like, oh, we got a pop song again.
Yeah. But if you think about like the value of that DLC compared to other stuff, like it works across all, like whenever a new game comes out, you can upgrade all the DLC like automatically to the new game.
Yeah.
And it just works. Even like Rock Band Blitz, when that came out, you could just pull over all your songs. And like some songs fall off here and there just because of licensing issues. But like, I think that's a really, really good DLC model. and I've definitely put more money into that than anything else.
Oh yeah, me
I
too.
think the Little Big Planet games did a really good job, because even though you can build your own levels, they would like create components that completely kind of redo the mechanics, and then they would package that with levels that kind of train you how to use those things.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, and those were like $5 to $10 for like a set of 5 levels or so, and a bunch of new stuff that you actually have to play through the levels to unlock. Um, let's see. So some of the DLC, so a lot of the DLC I've bought that I've liked, it wasn't really so much the DLC that was really good. It was that I really liked the game and I wanted to spend more time in it. I think that is the kind of DLC I like the most, and I feel like it doesn't even have to be a good value necessarily. It just has to be not integral to the main storyline. Because if you finish a game and you feel like you didn't get a complete story, then like that doesn't motivate me to buy the DLC. It motivates me to not buy the sequel.
Right.
Like if you can't make a complete game for $60, I'm not gonna give you more money. Like there's a game called Gravity Rush on the Vita, and I played through that, and then I was like sitting in my hotel room because it was on the Vita, and I was like, I really want to play more of this game. And I looked at the DLC, and it was like really overpriced. It was like several dollars for like a new costume and like a couple extra levels. And so I'd be like, well, I mean, I'm not doing anything else. I want to get I want to spend more time here. So I like bought overpriced DLC just to like spend more time with the game. I think that is that's where DLC is a good thing to have in games that wasn't possible in the past.
That's that's a really good system. I like all those. Those are great examples. I never even for some reason when I thought about like great DLC systems, for some reason I didn't think of Rock Band, which I have spent more hours on than like any other game, especially in the past few years. I bought an Xbox One over a PS4 because of my Rock Band controllers, because I could get an adapter and use all my old Rock Band controllers, which may or may not have been a good decision. I still haven't decided yet.
I feel I did the same thing. I bought like Rock Band 4, and we played it like twice. Like it's not like having it on the Xbox One made it any more like appealing. I could just play it on the Xbox 360 and it'd be the same thing. So, and weren't doing that anymore. But still, I really like the DLC.
Yeah. Do you think there's any type of microtransaction that is just outright just don't do it? Like I feel like a good example that people like just hate every single time is like day one DLC. Obviously, Rock Band's kind of an exception because the DLC was available in a previous game. So like when a new Rock Band game comes out, technically there's a lot of day one DLC, but it it was for a different game. But like, do you think there's any day one DLC or any other mechanics, microtransactions mechanics that are just outright just companies should never do these, they're just always bad, or is it always contextual?
I think it's always contextual. Like I think about Street Fighter V. Street Fighter V came out. It didn't have the story mode. Like the story mode was going to be free like a couple months later, but it had it had the same number of characters as the original launch of Street Fighter 4, and then the promise of more DLC characters over like months and months. And I think like the model and the ideas and everything that they had for that game when it came out weren't flawed, but it wasn't ready. Like they didn't finish all of the things that they thought they were going to have in the initial release, and they kind of like promoted it too early, and they kind of tied themselves to like a release date. And then they released it, and it just didn't feel like a complete game. And it wasn't really the business model intrinsically that caused that, but it was trying to change it and overestimating what they were capable of getting done in the amount of time and not delaying it that caused the problems with that game. And I think that's more I think that DLC takes the takes the uh, kind of gets the bad name when really it's just like poor planning
Hmm.
that generally causes like a bad DLC experience.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of that is also about how the company is able to frame, the argument, because like a lot of people feel like, for example, like I said, day 1 DLC is just a game, like a full game that's just been chopped up and sold in pieces, you know.
So
But I
there's
feel
one
like,
thing I really hate, I have
really.
to say.
Okay.
Uh, Pre-order DLC
Mhm.
is always trash.
Yeah.
Like it's 90% of the time it's like very, very small content, or it's like a consumable, or it's like a weapon that is really only useful for the first like 2 hours of a game, and then it just you get something more powerful. I think that because if they do anything else, they're going to ruin the game. And if they do anything else, like if they make it exclusive and like actually valuable, then it hurts the experience for like everyone else who's just going to buy it. And really, they have no reason to have a worse experience than the people that pre-ordered it.
Mhm.
So they can't do anything really good with it.
Mhm.
Uh, so they end up like marketing it and kind of being vague about what it actually means. And then when you get it in the game, you barely recognize that it's there because all it is like really minor help or like stuff that just doesn't really impact the game because anything else would just ruin the game design.
Yeah. I agree with that. The thing that bothers me the most about it is, like you said, exclusivity. Like, oh, this is a GameStop exclusive. This is a console specific exclusive. Like, I mean, it pisses collectors off like nobody's business. They're like, I like, this is my favorite character ever, and I have a PS4, not an Xbox, and screw you guys.
Yeah.
Or like, I don't want to buy this game from GameStop and from Steam and from like these, just to be able to get what should probably already be included in the game. Like, I feel like they try to frame it in a way, like, publishers and, whoever has the exclusive tries to frame it in a way to where the customer is getting extra value. But I think people are catching on to the fact that, like, it's not really. Like, it's just another thing for me to like miss out on if I don't buy it from this certain place or get it on this certain console.
But you're not actually missing out on anything 90% of the time. It's
That's
just
that's true. Yeah. I
and
know.
that's like the thing. It's like, but you have no way of knowing
Yeah.
because they can't really, like, you don't know enough about. That's where I was kind of explaining earlier with like DLC. You generally know what you're getting when you buy it, but like with that, you don't even know what your game is.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the DLC on top of that really has like even less meaning because you don't really know what the game is.
Yeah.
So
And like you said, it'll either be useful for like almost none of the game, or on the flip side, it'll be way too powerful and like just
yep,
that does feel like kind of a lose lose. Like
yep,
it's I feel like there's a if someone could make it work, it is a very narrow window to hit. Like
yep,
that right balance, and then even then you have people pissed off that they didn't buy it at this certain place, so they didn't get it.
yep.
So.
It's purely just there. Like they develop it just so that they can market it,
Mm-hmm.
but like the marketing for it is has to be totally meaningless
Yeah.
because it can't mean anything to anyone
Right.
because no one's played the game
Yeah. All right. I think we're gonna wrap up this episode. Any final thoughts on the topic or anything else?
yet. I don't know. Yeah, conceptually I like DLC. Uh, I think that in the future there as like uh, businesses experiment with different business models, there could be something interesting where they lower the prices of games and like chunk them out or split up the multiplayer and single player. You buy one disc and then pay another $20 and you get the other half.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be really interesting because then
Yeah.
you don't have to invest in something you don't know if you want yet. But like the DLC enables the game developers to experiment with business models where players can have less of a uh, like that $60 barrier to get a game, and have more of a like I know what I'm paying for because I've already experienced the content.
Yeah.
And I think hopefully it'll be used to find a way to get people to experiment with trying games that they wouldn't, and only buying things that they know that they like. And that's where it's empowering. Where it isn't is bad business models that exploit people. But I think like exploiting customers is never a good long-term strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's the final message I have is if you think DLC is bad, you're not alone. And at some point that will bite that publisher. And when it does that, then things will turn around. So
Very, very solid. All right. If you're listening to this on YouTube and you think we missed anything or you have something to say, definitely leave a comment. And if you're listening to us on iTunes or via the website, find the YouTube video, subscribe, and and leave a comment as well. So, Wes, thank you for joining me. I think we had a pretty good discussion.
yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we will see you all next time.
Yeah.